Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the big climate teach-in for MPs this morning. We'll make a start in just a few more moments. We're just going to wait for a couple more people to join us. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emma, and I'm part of the team at Hope for the Future. We're a climate communications charity which works nationally to equip communities and individuals to communicate the urgency of climate change with their local politicians. We've been working with Teachers for Climate Action over the last few months, supporting their group and constituents all over the country to invite their local MPs to take part in this event. At Hope for the Future, we feel it's vitally important that MPs and constituents have rich and challenging conversations about the climate. Teachers for Climate Action is a broad coalition of educators operating from regions across the UK, all also operating within their own kind of groups as well, who are passionate about the need for climate education and are keen to better communicate this with their local representatives. We hope that this event will be a key step towards beginning a forward-thinking conversation between teachers, campaigners and MPs around climate education. To find out more about how we can support you to engage your MP, you can visit our website at www.hftf.org.uk. So in our event today, our speakers, which include teachers and campaigners, will provide 10-minute short, sharp presentations around 5 key aspects of the climate crisis. I'm sure that our speakers will introduce themselves a little bit when we get going, but I just wanted to give you an overview of who we've got with us. So we're joined by Paul Turner. Paul was a geography teacher for 10 years, and he now commits his time to climate change education and teacher training, working as the Air Quality Schools Officer for Sustrans, running workshops on air pollution and helping to set up school streets. Paul spends the rest of his time writing teaching resources for a variety of organisations and as a tutor for Aim High, the free online and first curiosity-powered school. Paul will be kicking us off today, covering the small topic of climate. We're also joined today by Martyn Steiner. Martyn's an environmental science teacher at Halcyon London International School, where he works on embedding sustainability teaching in lessons across the school. Martyn will be speaking to us today in our second session about nature-based solutions. Rosalind Readhead will present in our third session covering consumption. Rosalind is an environmental campaigner with 7 years experience of developing policy for cutting emissions in cities. From September 2019, Rosalind lived the 1.5 degree net carbon zero lifestyle for 1 year to gain a deeper understanding of what policy needs to be in place to enable a good life on the net zero carbon lifestyle budget of around 1 tonne per year. For our fourth topic, we're really pleased to welcome Clover Hogan, who will be covering climate anxiety and mental health. Clover is a 21-year-old climate activist, researcher on eco-anxiety, and the founding executive director of Force of Nature, a youth non-profit which aims to mobilise mindsets for climate action. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dr Jess Tipton. Jess is the teacher and head of youth networks at Global Action Plan. Jess joins us for our final session today and will be covering the topic of education. We really hope that you enjoy this opportunity to experience some of the content that these teachers and campaigners share with their students firsthand, and to hear why they think that climate education really needs to be prioritised, not just this year, but in all the years preceding after this one. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for giving up their time to be here today, and thank you so much to you for attending. I'm really pleased to welcome also our MPs that are on the call today. So lastly, before I hand over to Paul, I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand again and for you to share. We're also streaming it on Facebook, so you can catch it over there as well. We'll be sending all our attendees a follow-up email next week with a link to this recording, directing you to Hope for the Future's latest resources and more from Teachers for Climate Action, as well as their kind of subgroups. We will be doing our absolute best to stick to time today, and each of our presenters will be speaking for around 10 minutes. So we are scheduled to finish at 11:30, and we'll try to make sure we do that. Finally, I'd just like to ask that everyone be respectful of all the contributions that are given in today's event, both from our speakers and when you're communicating with one another via the chat. So now I'll hand over to Paul Turner, who'll give you an introduction for Teachers for Climate Action, and before he'll take us through today's event. I really hope that you enjoy it, and over to you, Paul.
Hello, thank you, Emma. So yes, hello, I'm Paul. I'm speaking to you from the south coast of the UK, and thank you so much for coming along to this. Now, the purpose of this event is to build relationships. So one of the first things we wanted to do was please say hello in the chat. Do put the organisation or the school that you're from and where you are in the country. So do use the chat, and we're going to use the chat during the rest of the session. So just like Emma said, Teachers for Climate Action is a very loose group of people. We've come together under that name today. And what we as educators are intending to do is to emphasize the urgency and the need for action within the context that we exist at the moment. So wherever you work or live at the moment, kind of demanding that urgency and that action now. And hopefully that's what we convey. And also, I guess, yeah, just to emphasize that idea as well, is we're going to give you a flavor of maybe some of the ways that we as educators do that within the context of our own schools and our own settings. So I'm going to kick off with a session about the climate emergency. And this is a flavour of something actually that we do as part of Aim High. So Aim High, just as Emma said, is the nature first, curiosity powered online school. And we run live learning adventures that are free each week through our website and through Twitch and YouTube and lots of other platforms. And actually this is part of a special 4-part course that we developed. So during this, please do take notes and ask questions as we go. So use the chat to be able to put all of your questions. Feel free to comment, and do feel free also to kind of comment and answer anyone else's questions as well if you feel like you've got something to contribute. Now, just to check everyone's chat is working, please could you type your favourite fish into the chat thread now? So your favourite fish into the chat. Oh, Amanda's put manta ray. Nemo. So maybe we're going to have a flavour of ones that people like to eat, and then also maybe ones that people would like as a pet. Yeah, maybe a clownfish as a pet. We've got a great white shark there from Mike. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to start by saying the situation is very bad, and we're not going to sugarcoat that at all. But the purpose of this is not to focus on how bad everything is, but instead to explain maybe the details of where things are going wrong, and then also to explain what needs to change and what roles we can play, and often also to emphasize how simple and near many of the solutions are. And if all goes well, hopefully you'll feel empowered and have developed greater understanding and be ready maybe to be a catalyst for change. So fingers crossed that's where we get to. Now I'm going to start by sharing a little image. Now, any ideas what's going on in this image? Any ideas what's going on here? Maybe you might be able to name the animals involved. You might have an idea of where in the world this is, but what's going on? What's going on in this picture? Any ideas? Give people a minute just to have a go. Just think what might be going on in this picture. So Lizzie's put something about symbiotic relationship. Yeah, definitely. So the story of this is a butterfly in the rainforest, and salt can be a particularly rare resource in the rainforest. And what can happen is that when they are running low, they sometimes stop off to drink the salty tears of a friendly turtle. Now, this isn't where my lesson begins, but what it does do is emphasize just how beautiful nature is and can be. And that's a really important starting point, is to remind ourselves of the innate beauty and wonder within nature. And that's always something that we can emphasize with young people. Okay, this is actually where the lesson begins. Now, I have with me a piece of plain paper, or an A4 piece of paper. Now, if you've got one near you, you might like to grab it. Now, my challenge to you is, how many times do you think I can fold this piece of paper? So a piece of A4 paper, if I fold it in half, how many times can I fold the piece of paper? You throw your ideas into the chat. How many times can I fold this piece of paper? What have we got? 7, 9 from Lizzie there. Yeah, so what happens is every time I fold this piece of paper, it doubles in thickness. So the thickness doubles every time I fold it. And ultimately there is a limit, yeah, because it becomes too thick to bend. Now the world record is 12 folds with a very large piece of paper, very large and thin. Now I've got another question for you then. If I could keep folding this piece of paper in half and it kept doubling its thickness, how many folds do you think it would take until it was the thickness of the earth? So how many folds until this piece of paper was the thickness of the earth? You throw your ideas into the chat. Martyn's put 17, a very conservative guess there. Kit 50, Lizzie's 35. Harry's up to 1,000. Okay. It would be as thick as the earth in only 37 folds, so only 37 folds. Okay, we're going to keep developing this idea. I'll show you another image. Let's jump to this one. So this is the Milky Way, and it would take 100,000 years for a text message to traveling at the speed of light go from one side of the Milky Way to the other. Now, how many folds do you think it would take until this piece of paper was as thick as the Milky Way? So we've got 37 for the Earth. How many folds to be as thick as the Milky Way? Oh, Martyn's put 41, Rachel 39. These are very good guesses, but we've got Catherine with 10,000. Yeah, 1,000. So it would only take 83 folds, so only 83 folds for it to be as thick as the Milky Way. And actually, it would only take 103 folds for it to be as thick as the whole observable universe. Now, the purpose of talking through those numbers is just to emphasize how quickly things can run away and grow on their own, and actually how poorly developed and kind of evolved is our understanding of that. And what it does is it emphasizes that actually the climate emergency is not just a science problem, it's also a perception problem. And humans simply are not innately kind of evolved, and our minds don't work in a way that helps us to understand those. And instead, we just think of them as being really big, large, kind of uncomprehendable numbers. Okay, so the climate emergency is a perception problem as well as a science problem. So it's just as important to help young people understand that and to explore their perception as it is to explore a carbon dioxide graph. But we will start with a carbon dioxide graph. So here is carbon dioxide concentrations have now just tipped, only in the last few weeks, 420 parts per million. And what that means is if you take a million molecules in the atmosphere, around 420 of those would be carbon dioxide. Now, it sounds like a very small number, but actually you only need a very small amount of carbon dioxide to have a really big impact. This shows you, this comes from an observatory in the middle of Hawaii, it shows you the increase over the last, well, since about 1950, and you can see there how it's changed, how it's increased. It has this funny peak and trough each year, and that's partly to do with having a larger landmass in the northern hemisphere. So when it's the summer in the northern hemisphere, there's less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because the trees grow and leaves take in carbon dioxide, and obviously the reverse in the winter. Now what we can do is we can change our lens, so we can zoom in and out. So this is the context of the last 10,000 years, and what you can see is we are here, yeah? That's where we are now at 420 parts per million, and you can see over the last sort of 10,000 years, pretty flat and level, and then suddenly, since the Industrial Revolution, there's been this dramatic change, and it's that rate of change which is the dramatic, the really important thing to focus on. And you can see actually here, if we zoom out again, this is 800,000 years. You can see we've got these really clear cycles, but you can just see how kind of out of context the increase we've seen is. And actually you'd have to go back about 252 million years in order to find carbon dioxide concentrations at the same level they are now. But the most fundamental and important thing to focus on is the rate of change, because carbon dioxide and temperature has always fluctuated throughout the 4.6 billion years the Earth has existed. The key thing to focus on is how different the rate of change is now. I'm going to skip this bit about monkeys, because what I want to do is also just emphasize how the idea that things can grow rapidly out of control can also be a positive. And that's what I want to finish on. Now, if one person had an idea, so if they had a sort of light bulb moment and they learned something or were told something, or if they had an idea, if they then shared that idea with 3 people, and then the next day, those 3 people told another new set of 3 people. Now, how long do you think it would take for the whole world to know that idea? So we're saying the world's population, we're probably about 7.7 billion. Have a guess, how many days, weeks, months, years, how long do you think it would take for that idea to spread to the whole world? With one person telling 3 people. So Catherine's put 7 weeks, Suzanne's put 2 months. Any other ideas? How quickly could we share that idea? Two months. 3 months from Harry. Okay, it would take only 3 weeks for the whole world to know that one idea or that piece of information. Now, obviously, if you told more than 3 people, it could happen even quicker. And also the internet means it's much easier and quicker to access audiences. Now, there's obviously problems as well in terms of bubbles and the idea of kind of information being within niches and groups. But what it does is it shows the potential of how quickly we can actually share information if we were communicating it to more and more people. So I'm going to say thank you. I'm just going to let me stop sharing. I'm going to pass on now to Martyn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm Martyn, I teach science in London, and I've got a video that I'm going to show you this morning. And it's a bit of a chance to kind of take you on a field trip and bring you into my classroom and give you a bit of a sense about what teaching nature-based solutions can look like. So I'm going to mute myself and disappear and play you the video now.
We're at Chimney Meadows Nature Reserve. It's a large and spectacularly biodiverse wetland habitat in Oxfordshire. And in the summer months, it's a profusion of colours, of butterflies and flowers and birds. And that's all even though it's just a few years older than some of my students. It was converted from farmland about 20 years ago. But the really smart trick with Chimney Meadows is that not only is it fantastic for biodiversity, it also does amazing things for climate change. In the winter months, these fields act as a kind of natural sponge, and they store a lot of the excess rainwater. It's thanks to places like Chimney Meadows that villages around here, like Stand Lake, or indeed the 150,000 people just downstream of here in Oxford, are being protected from the effects of flooding. The flood defences aren't the only amazing thing that Chimney Meadows does for climate change, though. The soils here are undisturbed now, and so all of the carbon that gets locked away here stays locked away. But we know that these things come at a cost, and so I want to ask you a question. What do you think the relative value of this land is now as a nature reserve compared to what it was as farmland? Do you think maybe it's about half as valuable as it used to be? Or is it perhaps roughly the same? Maybe it's about 4 times what it used to be worth. Or perhaps it's as much as 16 times its previous value. Okay, it would have been too obvious to go for the highest number. It's in fact 4 times the value that it used to have as farmland. Still pretty impressive. So I think this is a real no-brainer solution. It just makes sense. We have land here which is worth more than it was as farmland and which is fixing 2 enormous environmental crises at one stroke.
Okay, so what are nature-based solutions? Well, there's 3 really important things that any nature-based solution has to have. The first thing is that it has to work with a natural process. So it doesn't count if you're just planting normal agricultural monocultures or something like that. The other thing is that it has to enhance nature. So a nature-based solution will always make the biodiversity better, or will in some way improve the ecosystem for the things that live in it. And then, of course, it has to solve a kind of social problem. The social problem we're talking about now is climate change. So we've seen an example already. Some other examples would be things like that here in the school, we could have a school garden, and all of the plants in that garden would take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that would help to kind of mitigate some of the climate change. Another exciting thing that you can do in Britain is you can reintroduce beavers, and the beavers will build a dam on the river and then make a lake, and then that lake will sort of help to slow down the water flow, and that will help to reduce flooding. And then the last thing that you could potentially do is you could restore some of our seagrass. We've lost about 90% of the seagrass in the UK. And what that would do is it would mean that when a storm came, and we're going to get more storms with climate change, that the storm's power would be kind of absorbed by some of the seagrass, and it would protect coastal communities. Okay, a really famous nature-based solution that we hear about a lot is kind of planting trees. So what are some of the things that trees might do that would help with climate change? Yeah, Lauren.
Carbon dioxide.
Okay, yeah, so one thing that they do is they take up carbon dioxide. Great. Can you think of anything else that they might do for climate change?
They can make it more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Trees
Okay.
promotes like walking and stuff.
Nice, yeah, okay, that's really great, yeah. Okay, so I've got a few ideas up here. One thing that they do is they prevent flooding. So we know that trees take up carbon dioxide, but for photosynthesis they also take up water, and so it'll reduce the total amount of water, and it'll make a flood less bad. This one here, yeah, that's absolutely right, that they kind of make it a nicer place for people to go, and there's some evidence to suggest that that means that people are more likely to walk or cycle if there are more trees. And then lastly, we expect it's going to get really hot with climate change. And so trees will both provide shade, you know, just in a park or something, but also trees will help to kind of reduce the general temperature in a city. Because you have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well, but they just help with the situation as it is.
Okay, so they're all possible correct. So you needed them all to get the correct answer.
Did anyone get that right?
Okay, so it looks like it, but it's not working alongside nature, and it's not promoting biodiversity, so it doesn't count. It's really important that it's biodiverse. Oh, it's 37%, so a lot, but not everything. Well done, eager hamster.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all from me.
Hello everyone. I'm Rosalind Readhead, and I'm here just to run through and give you a rough guide to what the net carbon zero lifestyle might look like. I trialled it for a year because I wanted to have a much deeper understanding of that, and I felt some of what we were being told was not really taking in all the different areas that are really important. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Professor Peter Newell from Sussex University. He says the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate change cannot be achieved without radical changes to lifestyles and shifts in behaviour, especially amongst the wealthiest members of our society. And I think this is really important to understand that actually it's the wealthiest people who are responsible for most of the emissions, but they also have the most agency, the actual possibility of really turning this around. And so it's a responsibility, but it's also an amazing opportunity. So what are lifestyle carbon footprints, and what are we going to be required to do? So a lifestyle carbon footprint is defined as the greenhouse gas emissions directly emitted and indirectly induced from household consumption, excluding those induced from government consumption and capital formation. So it's a really important part of it, and I'll explain a bit later about that. What do we need to do? Well, to keep to the Paris Agreement and below 1.5C, globally, citizens and society need to aim for per person consumption-based greenhouse gas emission targets of 2.5 tonnes per year in 2030, 1.5 tonnes per year by 2040, and 0.7 tonnes per year by 2050 in order to keep global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees. The other thing to really explain, because often we get quite top-down sort of numbers, and they're quite difficult for us as citizens to get a hold on what's going to be required of us in this sort of major transition that we're all going through. So I wanted to explain that 72% of global greenhouse gas emissions are related to household consumption. In the UK, it's around 75%. So this is a really major part of the climate jigsaw and the action that's going to be required from households and individuals is a major part of this. And this is going to, require behaviour change and also lifestyle change. But, we can get on to how we're going to do that in a minute. This next one is really trying to understand the whole global remaining lifetime carbon budget. So if we divided all of what is allocated to the lifestyle budget, the whole global budget, then that actually divides up to equally to be 30 tons of carbon per person on the globe. And I think this is a really important figure to understand, because this gives us a ballpark idea of what we have to play with as citizens, and also, you know, what government needs to do to facilitate that. So if we look at the 30 tons and we break it down, we can see that the average EU citizen, 9 tons, could use that up in three years. An American citizen much quicker, but also we have things like a new car. If you went for the higher end car, you know, the SUV, 50 tons, you've gone way over your entire lifetime carbon budget. And also if you flew to business class to Hong Kong and back, you'd be using up 10 tons, which obviously is a major part of that. And I think it's quite important for us to get a feeling of why some of these choices can be so damaging. Now, the next slide is really understanding this in a little bit more detail. So on the left, there's what we call the Oxfam wine glass, and that shows that the wealthiest 10% produce half the carbon emissions, whilst the poorest 3.5 billion account for just 1/10. Now, I think it's important that we understand this from a personal point of view, and you only need to be earning £27,000 per year to be in the 10% richest people of the world. And people, I think, in the UK might be quite surprised about that. And within the 20%, I mean, we're mostly all in the 20% of the wealthiest. And so we are really looking at producing, vast quantities of carbon compared to other people in the world. And if we go on to the Kate Raworth donut and we look at the sweet spot is in the green donut, where we are not massively exceeding consumption, really massive overconsumption. Whereas the people at the bottom end of this graph, don't have enough really. And so we would want to increase a little bit so that they have a more sustainable lifestyle. So this is what is known as kind of climate justice. And it's extremely important for us to understand our massive part in this and how we can turn this around by reducing what is a normalized consumption. So I felt that we needed to run a kind of rapid imperfect prototype on what it might be like to be living on net carbon zero of about 2.75 kilograms a day. So I recorded a journal, you can see that online, and I can supply a link for that. Yes, I can't go into everything because it's very complex, so I'm going to give you a quick taster, but now I just want to show you how I did it. So this is one of the most important things. I think everybody needs a handbook. So if Mike Berners-Lee, who I used this 2010 version when I started the project, and then by just 3 days after my project finished, he produced his new updated version. And I think it's extremely important that every UK citizen, at school or not, have access to this carbon literacy. We get to know about financial literacy, and this is very important in our life, to know how much a pint of milk is, or how much a pair of jeans are, but we need to know this about what we are buying. So I believe that everybody needs to have access to this information. One of the things that was also really important for me to understand on the project was that a lot of things are actually very low carbon and carbon free. Some things that I really enjoy, and we probably really enjoy, are potentially there if we create the right conditions within our community to make these low carbon options and carbon freebies accessible to everybody, the easiest thing that you can do. On transport, which is probably one of the biggest sectors in our contribution to consumption in this country, consumption emissions. I can't go into everything here, but I'll point out that there are some, obviously some amazing options here for us. If we create cycling and walking, these are incredibly low, but there are some real things to flag up. We need to decarbonise our public transport much more. Not enough at the moment for long distance journeys, but also we must be very wary of cars. Just the embedded carbon of a car is about 11 to 50 tonnes, as I pointed out before, SUV at the top of that. But also the flying is really, a major contribution. Anyway, so going on, because there's a lot to say, but so this is like the sort of average day of my journal. This is actually in summer, so I don't include heating in this. Heating was a very difficult part of my project. You can see that it's mostly food that takes up the major part of my budget. So this is obviously very important because we have to eat. That's a fairly fundamental thing. And I'm here on my cycle, so I did do that a lot. But in terms of heating, I was really shocked that just 1 hour of my gas heating used up my entire budget. Now, gas is not going to be possible at all for net carbon zero lifestyle. So this, I think a lot of people know this, but I'll just emphasise that decarbonising 25, 27 million homes in the UK is the biggest infrastructure project ever undertaken on UK soil. And I would say that for most people in the UK, heating and hot water, that's pretty non-negotiable. And having lived through with hardly any heating, because I couldn't really afford it on the budget, I can tell you that's not quality of life. So we want to get this sorted, definitely. Because I did it for the whole year, another thing that came up was that I did want a holiday, and I did want the options. And so, rail, if it's decarbonised to maybe French levels of 22 grams per mile or even less. A fully seated, electric bus can be as little as 6 grams per mile. That's a 90-seater. And then, there's things like sail passenger ships. And if we really created a UK-wide cycling network, I would love to go camping with an electric assist, bike and set up a tent in the countryside. So if you give us space to do that, or give us safe space, and families can do that, everybody can do that. And I think that's a really, it'd be a lovely thing to do. Finally, I just wanted to say that, when we're talking about system change and individual change, it's part of the same body. We need to be cutting our carbon footprint as wealthy citizens proportionately in the world. It's extremely important for us, but it's also extremely important for us all to be helping and really push system change in our own countries and globally. And if you wanted to do one thing, to really look at your carbon footprint, then I would say try living on the net carbon zero lifestyle of 1 tonne for just one day. It's 2.75 kilograms for the day. And if you get Mike Berners-Lee book, he will, give you the carbon literacy, which I think the carbon literacy must go mainstream. The carbon literacy to be able to really see your pathway to net carbon zero. And I think you'll find it very interesting too. Thank you very much.
Hello. Absolutely delighted to be here today. My name is Clover Hogan. I am a 21-year-old climate activist and the founder and executive director of an organization called Force of Nature. We are a youth nonprofit mobilizing mindsets for climate action, and we now have a student network in 52 countries supporting young people from all corners of the globe really step up rather than shut down in the face of the climate crisis And we work with an enabling ecosystem of decision makers across business and policy, and of course, education, to ensure that young people have a seat at the decision-making table, whether that is with curriculum and showing up to school, or that is the organizations that they go on to work at. So today I'm going to be talking about my great love and passion and obsession, which is really the intersection of mindset and the climate crisis, with a particular lens and emphasis on mental health and the emotional toll of the climate crisis today. Now, for a little bit of background for a moment, I grew up in Australia's tropical North Queensland, fishing frogs from the toilet and dodging snakes that hung from the ceiling. So if you haven't been to Australia, all of the rumors are true. We have all of the craziest, scariest animals in the world. But for me, that meant that nature was the cornerstone of my upbringing, the cornerstone of my childhood. And I spent more time outside than in. Now, I wasn't allowed to watch horror films growing up, so I turned to documentaries instead and watched An Inconvenient Truth, The Cove. I saw horrifying images of million-year-old forests being bulldozed to produce Big Macs, and terrifying graphs from Al Gore that showed how quickly we were devouring the earth and how good we were at pretending otherwise. In those moments, I was filled with uncertainty and anger and frustration, and even a sense of betrayal. I had grown up for the first 11 years of my life completely oblivious to these huge existential challenges that were happening today, happening in that moment, and that I knew would continue to shape the rest of my life. And I tried to understand why I hadn't learned about these things in school, why I hadn't learned about them at the dinner table, why I hadn't read about them in the media or heard about them from any Australian politician. So I became fascinated with the role of mindset in the context of the climate crisis, and understanding why it is that we shut down in the face of challenges that feel so enormous. And Paul touched on this earlier, from the kind of lens of how we're wired, right? It's really difficult to compute the enormity of a challenge like the climate crisis, and particularly for those of us living in a bubble of climate privilege, right? When we're not in frontline communities, losing our homes to rising sea levels or to wildfires, it's easy to put the climate crisis on the back burner. But increasingly, as I came to research this area, I realized that there was a huge mental health epidemic that we weren't talking about. And some of you might be familiar with the word eco-anxiety, but more and more young people from around the world, and including frontline communities, Indigenous communities, are experiencing an explosion in mental health problems that are driven by the climate crisis. So research from 2019 showed that in the UK, over 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds felt eco-anxiety. That relates to feelings of grief, frustration, anger, even panic, and in some cases, suicidal ideation. I know that I had been there when I was 11, and I've been in that place many times in the 10 years since that I've been working on the climate crisis. Now, we saw the same on a global scale through our research at Force of Nature. We surveyed and sat down with over 500 students in those 52 countries and asked them about their emotional, psychological experience of the climate crisis. Over 70% of them said that the climate crisis had a negative impact on their mental health. And critically, over 70% of those young people said that they felt hopeless in response to the climate crisis. Now, when I first started having these conversations with young people, I found them really surprising, because this was around the time of the youth strikes for climate. And the dominant rhetoric and narrative was that young people, people like me, are inspired and empowered and taking to the street and claiming back our futures. And yet, for most of us who have spoken to those young people, we realize that the reality is very different. More and more young people are falling into despair. I've spoken to 13-year-old girls who tell me that they've already decided they don't want to have kids because they don't want to bring them into a world defined by the climate crisis. I've spoken to 8 and 9-year-olds in the classroom who have told me that when they envision the future, it's not the future that was described by my parents of flying cars and a world where deadly diseases were eradicated, but a future where we have empty supermarket shelves and cities underwater, a kind of planet that no one wants to find waiting for them when they grow up. So we see this rise in despair. Now, when it comes to eco-anxiety, this is not something that we would want to pathologize or treat as a mental health illness or condition. As every climate psychologist I've met would argue, eco-anxiety is a perfectly natural human response to the climate crisis. In fact, it shows that we care. It shows that we have empathy. It shows that we're not numbing ourselves as we hurtle toward the cliff that scientists tell us we're on. However, that eco-anxiety can tip into something called ecophobia if we don't have a clear sense of agency. Ecophobia relates to those feelings of powerlessness. And that powerlessness can best be illuminated by some of the stories that I hear working with young people in classrooms, and ironically working with people in positions of power in boardrooms and policy-making spaces. And those stories sound like, I'm too small to make a difference. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the experience. It's not up to me. Someone else will fix it. Or the one I hear all the time, which is that the system is too broken to create meaningful change. As Paul touched on, there's so much about our wiring as humans that makes it difficult to respond to the climate crisis. But I believe that the thing that's getting in our way right now for mobilizing mindsets en masse are these stories. Now, these stories are imprinted upon us from the time we grow up and driven by lots of different influences that push us toward extrinsic values rather than intrinsic ones. And we can think of those meta stories as kind of cultural narratives. Those cultural narratives push us toward consumption, consumerism, competitiveness, comparison culture. I go on my phone for 5 minutes on Instagram and I am inundated with things that tell me I'm not smart enough or pretty enough or good enough, but I can make all of that better and all of my problems go away if I just buy this product or use this service. And even the education system in many ways pushes me toward those same values of comparison and competition, where I'm comparing myself to the person next to me. I'm finding my value and worth based on a number that is assigned to me. And then when I do graduate and I go into the workplace, as is the case with so many of the leaders I've worked with, that main narrative is that I need to conform to the status quo. I need to make enough money for my company. I need to climb the corporate ladder and avoid the kind of risks that could cost me my job. So there are lots of influences out there that affect how I see myself in here. And then those inner stories, as I touched on, range from not having the skills or talents to solve the climate crisis, or the challenge being way too enormous to do anything about. And that is why I believe we need a real revolution in mindset. We need to completely rethink the way that we address these issues. I've been working in the climate space for a decade now, and I've seen that there is no shortage of incredible people, of resources, of solutions, of technologies. In fact, we have all of the solutions and technologies that we need to solve the climate crisis right now. Yet we are lacking that critical thing in the equation, which is the tenacity, determination, and vision to get us there. And that is why it is so important that we center this conversation around the role of mindset, and particularly mental well-being, because we cannot achieve external sustainability without first attaining internal sustainability. And in fact, this despair that is experienced by young people is one of the most powerful drivers for change that we have. We saw that in the Youth Strikes for Climate, where 1.9 million young people took to the streets in protest of climate inaction. And I've seen it working in those spaces of power as well. In every boardroom I've worked in, whether that is with Unilever or P&G or PepsiCo, huge multinational companies that touch billions of lives every single day. When I ask those leaders why they're in those rooms, They don't tell me it's because they read some IPCC report about 1.5 degrees warming from the UN. They say it's because their kid came home to them at the end of the day and said, "Mom or Dad, what are you doing about the climate crisis?" So when we create space for those difficult emotions that come up in response to this moment in time, and we examine the stories that we subscribe to understand if they empower us or shut us down. And critically, when we do both of those things through the lens of intergenerational exchange, bringing together the velocity and energy of youth with the knowledge and wisdom of experience, we can deliver transformative solutions that accelerate change at the pace and the scale that is required. So my parting words would be to step into your emotions rather than away from them, particularly when you're creating space for young people. Identify those stories that society imprints upon you and the stories that you have in your own mind, and decide whether they service or hinder your ability to take action. Find focus by identifying the problem that ignites that fire in your belly that creates those emotions, because your impact to create change will come from that focus. And show up with passion. That's my final point. So much of this crisis is defined by trying to outrun these problems and trying to fight them and react against them, to the point that sometimes we forget to actually stop, pause, breathe, and think about what it is we're working toward. So my final invitation for you all today would be to take that time to think, what is that world without a climate crisis that I want to create? What is that world that I want to leave to my students or my kids or young people in general? And how can I show up every day to create those pockets of that future in the present? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clover, and everybody else who's spoken. It's so inspiring to be part of this event. So I am Jess. I'm a teacher, languages teacher. I went into secondary teaching after 10 years at the UK Department for the Environment, DEFRA, and in university research. So a few years ago, I founded the London Schools Eco Network, and this has provided a model for 5 further vibrant youth-led networks across the UK, with more joining all the time. The students chair and minute their own meetings. They run campaigns and social media accounts. They take part in research, create awareness-raising video and written content, and speak at events. And together they form a UK schools sustainability network that hopes to be represented at COP26 in November. So the reason I established these networks was because there are so many staff and students, as we've been hearing, anxious to do something tangible about our future, but who feel powerless and often alone. So I'm going to play a short clip from students in the Midlands, London and Berkshire that they filmed together to show in school assemblies, that shows quite well some of their concerns.
To be completely honest, until last year, I had no idea about anything environment related. But it was really in my English lessons with my teacher who constantly reminded us of the issue and that I had to research it.
I couldn't be learning about this world that we live in, where human activity has such detrimental consequences, and not feel like I couldn't do anything about it. Like, it was very much a thing where this subject I was learning perpetuated this idea in my mind that I needed to do something to fix this.
A lot of my passion for environmental change comes from being pretty passionate about poverty relief, because obviously it's always the most vulnerable, poorest people that are hit hardest by the real life impacts of climate change. And I think coming from that kind of standpoint, rather than more of let's just help animals and things like that, which a lot of the aforementioned criticism that eco-warriors get. Coming from a slightly more human perspective, kind of means that I think it's a bit more appealing, and when you can also paint it as a bit more of like a compassionate movement, where like you're not just trying to help like cute dogs and stuff. You're actually trying to like save people.
And lots of the people get quite a bit of eco-anxiety, especially seeing kind of the reluctance and complete failure by our government and those people in power to actually do something. And that makes you, like on a personal level, feel like you should be more responsible, take action. And I think that's something that encouraged me.
And, you know, you see a whole contingent of animals like dying because the heat is too high, or, you know, flash floods or something like that. It does really, you know, make you really sad. But I think doing concrete actions is one of the best ways to make yourself feel better, because then you can actually see how you're making a difference, and it does really help.
One of the things I respect most in people, and this isn't just talking about climate change, this is a holistic thing, is when they take actions that they will never gain any benefit from. And something that really epitomizes that is when older people in the older generation who might never be affected by climate change still do all they can to prevent it.
So schools, as we know, are at the centre of our communities, and some do have amazing eco-committees with dedicated students and teachers taking action. But these efforts can be quite ad hoc and mostly voluntary, fitted in around lessons by students and staff who really understand the challenges we face and are taking on this responsibility. So I think that we need MPs to join the call for all schools in their constituencies to have the support and backing to mainstream sustainability in education. It's essential that all young people develop the skills and emotional resilience to discuss, tackle and come to terms with the climate and ecological crises, so that they are prepared for their personal and professional lives. In effect, this is a safeguarding duty of the education system that I've seen has been brought up in the comments as well. So many students are calling for such an education, but teachers and schools need the training, support and the authority to embed sustainability in their school operations and teachings. The youth-led Teach the Future campaign that met with around 70 MPs at the Houses of Parliament in February last year is calling for broad climate and sustainability education and has the backing of nearly 150 organisations, including the biggest teaching unions. There are numerous organisations and businesses and academics and psychotherapists around the UK ready with resources, events and practitioners all wanting to work with schools. There is the Let's Go Zero 2030 Schools campaign, the long-established Eco Schools programme. There are teachers and pupils wanting to get involved, but there is a real lack of time, resource and steer from the top of schools and the education system to allow for widespread uptake. That's what we're finding in the networks. This is about everyone's present and future, and schools are the perfect base to galvanise and inspire communities. By everyone rallying together, we can do this. And there are so many educational, socioeconomic, physical and mental health benefits, as we've been hearing. Student reps from the networks have come up with these tangible actions that schools can take, with backing and support from central and local government.
We want every school to have a governor and member of SLT with sustainability in their remit.
We want every school to have a sustainability lead who is given the time and allowance for the role.
We want every school to be signed up for the Let's Go Zero 2030 Schools campaign.
We want every school to have a garden or outside classroom space.
We want every school to make sure sustainability is integrated into the curriculum so that every student learns about it throughout their learning.
So despite what we might think, given the growth in youth climate movements, research by the charity Global Action Plan shows that young people do still feel desperately isolated and unsupported in their concern for the climate crisis. They feel that others, their peers, but adults especially, don't care. So we need adults in decision-making positions to step up and show them this is not the case, which is why it is so important that MPs help us to ensure there are dedicated roles flying the flag for sustainability in our schools, that they themselves are championing green jobs and changes to local areas, and that we are all leading by example. So I will give the final word back to the students. This is a short trailer of some video letters from the future that they produced in workshops with Bill Finnegan, who's a researcher from Oxford University exploring secondary school energy and climate programmes. So this is the trailer, and it's composed of little snippets from lots of their videos.
Dear Rajat, it is me from 2050. A lot has changed since 2021. Some for the better, some for the worse. Climate change still remains a prevalent issue in today's society.
I look back on the time you are living in with fondness. We still talk about and reminisce the bizarre chaos of the 2020 period. Well done for making it through. It did, slowly but surely, come to an end.
I know you dream of being an architect, building green oases in urban cities, so never forget why. Never get sidetracked by the fast innovation of technology and the rush of building the best buildings in the city.
I'd like to know if you and those around you still feel a sense of moral obligation to protect the environment, or are you beginning to feel pessimistic about it all?
You're shocked. You knew the way everyone treated this planet was bad, but you never thought it'd be this bad, did you? The air is hot and heavy now. Pollution is so bad you can't even take a breath outside.
Massive corporations continue to stake their place in the world of politics and, subsequently, the environment. They continue to mass produce, fast fashion is still prevalent, the new Heathrow runway was erected and continues to launch and receive plane after plane after plane.
And the atrocities the world has witnessed since your time can be difficult to process. But if we've learnt one thing from all this, it's that life finds a way to go on. And it did.
All I will say is be open to change. You might not like it, but it is an inevitable part of life, and we must evolve and adapt to account for it.
So thank you very much, and I think I will hand back to Paul now.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to all of our speakers and educators today. We hope that we've taken you on a bit of a journey. So this has been a very fast-paced jump through all of these different areas, but we've created a resource here as well, and this video will be shared and publicly available after the event. Now, the purpose of this was to emphasize the idea of community and relationships. So hopefully either there are people in the chat that you recognize and there's been an opportunity to engage with them. Please do continue to communicate with your MP and local councillors where you work. So use this as an opportunity to reinvigorate you and inspire you to continue that. You could share the video and the resources with them as well. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well then, as well as saying thank you for coming along, was that we will share a feedback form after the event, and actually the link I think is in the chat, that gives you the opportunity to provide some feedback, but also say if you'd like to continue being part of this conversation. So if you're keen to continue hearing from teachers for climate action and hope for the future as well. There's lots of other events happening through their networks and through the people that they work with as well. So keep an eye out for those. But again, thank you for coming along. Thank you for the speakers, and hopefully we've inspired you to take action. Bye.